It's the night of May 24th, 2012 in Montreal. A security camera inside a modest apartment complex records two men walking side by side down a narrow hallway. One is Jun Lin, a 33-year-old international student at Concordia University. The other is a man he had only recently met online. The camera follows them as they disappear into an apartment on the third floor. Neither of them is seen leaving again that night. Jun Lin was born in Wuhan, China in 1978. Friends called him Justin. In 2010, he moved to Canada to study computer engineering, chasing the kind of future his family had hoped for him. By 2012, he was living in Montreal's Griffintown district and working part-time at a local convenience store. To those who knew him, Jun Lin came across as polite and hardworking, the kind of person who rarely drew attention to himself. Friends described him as quietly ambitious, always trying to do a little better for himself. Life in Montreal gave him freedom he hadn't fully had before. He had once been married in China, but in Canada, he began living more openly as a gay man. He was dating and living with a partner, all while trying to balance those new experiences with the expectations of a family back home who still didn't know he hadn't come out. The man Jun Lin followed into that apartment was Luca Magnotta. He was born in 1982 in Scarborough, Ontario, under the name Eric Clinton Newman. In his 20s, he changed it to Luca Rocco Magnotta. He had spent most of his life trying to reinvent himself. By his late 20s, he was working as a small-time porn actor and escort, often changing his name and appearance to match the persona he wanted people to see. He was known for chasing attention online, posting under dozens of aliases and filling forums with strange, obsessive messages about himself. Magnotta had lived in several Canadian cities before settling in Montreal in 2011. Neighbors in the apartment building found him odd and often kept their distance. He rarely spoke to anyone in the hallways, and when he did, his behavior came off as nervous or rehearsed, like he was playing a role. Behind closed doors, he spent most hours on the internet, feeding a growing obsession with violent fantasies and the idea of becoming famous for something terrible. On that May night, he had arranged to meet Jun Lin through an online ad. The camera in the hallway showed them walking side by side. When the door to Magnotta's apartment closed, there was no more witnesses, except for the camera Magnotta had set up inside. Hours later, a video appeared online under the title, "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." It showed Jun Lin tied to the bed frame in Magnotta's apartment. What followed was a carefully staged recording of his murder. Magnotta used an ice pick and a kitchen knife, pausing at times to adjust the camera, making sure the violence stayed centered in the frame. Music played in the background, chosen deliberately, as if he wanted the film to look rehearsed. The security cameras couldn't capture what happened inside, but in the days that followed, they tracked Magnotta's movements. He came and went at odd hours, hauling garbage bags to the bins. At one point, he dragged a large suitcase down the hallway. Other times, he rushed past with cleaning supplies, pausing to stare into the lens before slipping back inside. Neighbors started to complain about a terrible smell spreading through the building. No one knew yet what was inside the bags coming out of apartment 208. On May 29, 2012, a janitor stepped outside to check the garbage bins behind the apartment building. Among the trash was a suitcase, left out in the summer heat. The smell was so strong that he called the police right away. When they opened it, officers found a human torso inside. That same day in Ottawa, brown paper packages began arriving at offices that had nothing to do with the apartment building. One was delivered to the headquarters of the Conservative Party of Canada, another was sent to an elementary school. Inside were human body parts wrapped in plastic, along with handwritten notes in red ink. The letters were rambling, filled with insults towards politicians, and ended with a chilling line, "This is just the beginning." Investigators quickly turned their attention to apartment 208. When they reviewed the building's security footage, the images told a clear story. Magnotta was seen hauling garbage bags down the hallway, dragging the suitcase that matched the one found outside, and carrying cleaning supplies in and out of his unit. The video confirmed what the smell and the packages had already suggested. Jun Lin had never left the building alive. By the time police identified the torso in the suitcase as belonging to Jun Lin, Luca Magnotta was already gone. He had left his bloodstained mattress behind and boarded a plane out of Montreal. Within days, he was in Europe, moving between Paris and Berlin, checking into cheap hotels under false names. Back in Canada, the case exploded into headlines. The suitcase, the packages, and the video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick" had turned the killing into a worldwide news story. Interpol issued a red notice, and Magnotta's face was suddenly on wanted posters around the world. On June 4, 2012, a clerk at an internet cafe in Berlin noticed a man sitting alone at a computer. He was reading news articles about himself, scrolling through coverage of the manhunt. When German police stormed inside, Magnotta tried to give a fake name. He was arrested without a fight. After his arrest in Berlin, Magnotta was extradited to Canada under heavy security. In December 2014, he went on trial for the murder of Jun Lin. He pleaded not guilty, claiming mental illness, but the jury rejected his defense. Magnotta was found guilty of first-degree murder and several related charges. He received a life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. For Jun Lin's family, who had traveled from China to attend the proceedings, the verdict offered the closest thing to justice they could hope for. In early July 2014, 28-year-old Lars Mittank traveled with a group of friends to the Bulgarian coast. Their destination was Golden Sands, a resort town on the Black Sea known for its crowded beaches, cheap beer, and all-night clubs. For a week, it was the usual party trip. Days at the beach, partying in nightclubs, and endless drinking in the bars along the waterfront. On the evening of July 6th, a small argument changed everything. While out drinking, Lars and his friends ran into another group of football fans. Words were exchanged, and the argument turned into a fight. Lars was punched in the side of the head. The injury didn't seem serious at first, but later he complained of pain and dizziness. A doctor would diagnose a ruptured eardrum. It was the start of a chain of events that none of his friends could have predicted. Lars Mittank was from Etzhow, a small city in northern Germany. He worked as an engineer and was known as reliable and easygoing. Football was his passion, and he followed Werder Bremen closely, often planning trips and nights out around the matches. Friends later said he wasn't the type to go looking for trouble. He liked nights out and a few drinks, but he wasn't aggressive. That's why the fight in Bulgaria felt out of character. To them, Lars was the friend who could laugh things off, the one who avoided confrontation. The local doctor who diagnosed the ruptured eardrum said it wasn't life-threatening, but warned him not to fly until it had healed. The pressure in the cabin could make the injury worse. His friends were due to leave on July 7th. They agreed it was safer for him to stay, even though it meant he would be traveling alone. Lars checked into a small hostel in Varna and told him he would catch a flight home a few days later. He spoke with his mother back in Germany, letting her know about the ear injury and that he would return home once it healed. But as the hours went by, his phone calls began to take on a different tone. He told her that something didn't feel right, that he thought men were following him. His voice sounded tense, and he asked her to block his credit card in case someone tried to use it. Later that evening, he left the hostel suddenly, telling her he didn't feel safe there. Lars checked into another hotel, this one cheaper and less crowded. The staff there would later describe him as restless and anxious. He paced the halls, opened and closed his door at odd hours, and seemed to be watching for someone who never appeared. Throughout the night, he continued to call his mother, repeating that he didn't trust the people around him. By the next morning, Lars decided to leave the hotel and head for Varna airport. He called his mother again, saying he wanted to come home as soon as possible. When he arrived, he went to the airport's medical office to be cleared for the flight. The doctor examined his ear and prescribed a course of antibiotics. For most patients, it would have been routine, but Lars grew uneasy. He told his mother later that he didn't want to take the pills, muttering that they might not be safe. Moments later, without explanation, he stood up and walked out of the examination room, leaving behind his luggage, passport, and phone. Security cameras in the terminal caught Lars as he walked quickly out of the clinic. At first, he seemed restless, glancing around, his movements sharp and uncertain. Then, without warning, he broke into a sprint. The footage shows him running through the departure hall, weaving past travelers and staff. He bursts through the main doors, crosses the parking lot, and climbs over a fence at the edge of the airport grounds. On the other side lies open farmland and scattered trees. He disappears into the fields beyond the fence, and from that moment on, Lars Mittank is gone without a trace, never to be seen again. Immediately, police started searching the fields and roads around the airport, but found nothing. In the days that followed, the search widened. Local authorities, volunteers, and even his family who had flown in from Germany joined the effort. Posters with his face went up in Varna and the surrounding villages. Search teams went through fields, forests, and even abandoned buildings, but there was no signs of Lars. His passport, wallet, phone, and luggage were still at the airport. Tips came in from the public, but none of them led anywhere. Since that day in 2014, countless theories have tried to explain what happened to Lars Mittank. What is certain is that the CCTV footage at Varna Airport captures the last known moments of Lars's life. A young man clutching his head, running in panic through a crowded terminal, before vanishing into the fields beyond. It's January 2013, and 21-year-old Elisa Lam travels from Vancouver to California. She was a student at the University of British Columbia and had planned a solo trip along the West Coast, visiting several cities by train and bus. Los Angeles was one of her stops. She checked into the Cecil Hotel, a century-old building in downtown LA that was known for cheap rates and a rough reputation. At first, Elisa was assigned to a shared room with other travelers, but after a few days, the hotel moved her into a private room following complaints about her unusual behavior. Elisa had been born and raised in Vancouver, the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong. Away from home, she poured much of herself into writing online. On her Tumblr blog, she posted fashion ideas, book reviews, and candid thoughts about her mental health. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. Medication helped her manage the swings in mood, but it also came with side effects she often wrote about. Friends and family described her as bright and creative, but also someone who could quickly slip into isolation. Traveling was her way of breaking out of that routine, of pushing herself into the world. The Cecil Hotel stood on Main Street in downtown Los Angeles. Built in the 1920s, it had once been marketed as a stylish destination for travelers. Over the decades, the surrounding neighborhood changed, and the hotel gained a different reputation. By 2013, it was a mix of cheap tourist rooms and long-term housing for low-income residents. For visitors, the contrast was hard to miss. Some guests were backpackers passing through Los Angeles, others were people who had lived in the building for years. The atmosphere was often tense, with reports of drug use, violence, and theft. It was a place chosen more for its price than for comfort or safety. During her stay in Los Angeles, Elisa kept in touch with her parents in Vancouver every day. She called or emailed to let them know where she was and how she was doing. On January 31st, those updates stopped. That was the last day she was confirmed to be inside the Cecil Hotel. When her parents didn't hear from her, they grew worried and contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. Officers began checking the hotel, speaking with staff, and searching the building. Dogs were brought in and even taken up to the roof, but nothing was found. 2 weeks after Elisa Lam disappeared, investigators released a piece of security footage from inside one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. The clip was nearly 4 minutes long and quickly spread online. The video shows Elisa stepping into the elevator and pressing several buttons at once. The doors remain open as she moves to the corner, then peers into the hallway. She steps out, looks both ways, and then darts back inside as if hiding from someone. Her movements grow stranger as the recording continues. She presses herself against the wall, then steps out again, waving her arms in front of her in loose, almost fluid motions. At one point, she moves her hands as though speaking to someone just out of view, but the camera shows no one else in the hall. Throughout the entire clip, the elevator doors never close, adding to the unsettling effect. Finally, Elisa steps out of frame and the doors shut. She never reappears. When the footage was made public on February 14th, it spread rapidly, sparking theories worldwide. Some viewers thought she looked terrified. Others believed she was playing a game, or even under the influence of drugs. For many, it was simply disturbing to watch. A young woman's last known moments captured in a grainy recording. On February 19th, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa Lam was last seen, hotel guests began complaining about water pressure. Some said the taps ran slowly. Others noticed the water coming out discolored with a strange taste. A maintenance worker went to the roof to inspect the 4 large water tanks that supplied the building. When he climbed up and opened one of the hatches, he made a grim discovery. Inside the tank was the body of Elisa Lam. Her clothes were floating in water next to her. Investigators were baffled by what they found. The water tanks were not easy to reach. To get inside, someone had to climb up onto the platform, scale the tank itself, and lift a heavy metal lid before entering. The idea that Elisa could have done all of this on her own left police, hotel staff, and her family struggling to understand how she ended up there at all. An autopsy was carried out in the days after Elisa's body was recovered. There were no signs of physical trauma, no evidence of sexual assault, and no drugs or alcohol in her system, other than her prescribed medication. Toxicology reports showed something unusual. Elisa had been prescribed several medications for bipolar disorder and depression, but the levels in her system suggested she hadn't been taking them consistently. Some were present in small amounts, others were missing entirely. Investigators believe this inconsistency may have triggered severe disorientation or psychosis. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder noted as a significant factor. But for many, the conclusion raised more questions than answers. In the years since Elisa Lam's death, her case had remained one of the most discussed disappearances of the internet age. Some point to her medical history, believing she suffered a severe episode brought on by inconsistent medication, which explains her erratic behavior in the elevator and how she ended up on the roof. Others doubt that explanation, They question how she gained access to the roof and the tanks, both of which required navigating locked doors and heavy lids. To them, the possibility of foul play has never been ruled out. Elisa Lam's death remains officially ruled an accident, but for many, the unanswered questions and the haunting video have kept her story alive long after the investigation was closed.